The lemons theory is typically used in used car markets where I don't know anything about a car. I'm not a mechanic. So if I'm going into the buyer market, there's a peach and a lemon. A peach is a great car. A lemon is a crappy car. If a lemon is 5,000 and a peach is 10,000, my brain midpoints, and most people will say, hey, I'm going to pay about 7,500 for this car because I can't compute the risk of one over the other. When that happens, all the owners of the really good cars leave the market and you end up having the market flooded with lemons. If you think about that in your organization, now it's not cars, right? But your biggest asset is the human capital that you have. If you are not doing this well and other companies are doing a better job at it, you're going to have this flight of talent leave your org. They're going to go to where they see this being done well, where they're seeing it managed well. We very much see the impressions on LinkedIn outperform from companies that have their employees sharing what it's like to work in a positive environment like that, about 8x versus companies that aren't. So the fact that this computes to the ROI is why it's going to work, but it's clear why it does.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this latest episode of the Freedom of Work podcast. And we're going to be speaking all about rethinking travel to drive culture in distributed teams. So I'm joined by Stephen, and he's going to share all about himself and a little bit of background and what drove him to exploring the intersection of travel and culture. So thanks, Stephen.
Hey, thanks so much. Been looking forward to this for a while.
Yeah, definitely. It's been one that has been in the calendar and ready to explore. It's definitely an interesting topic and something that maybe some people don't think too much about. So I'm definitely ready to get into it.
Yeah, I think we're here to fly the flag for that conversation, Phil.
Yeah. So what actually drew you to this sort of topic in the first place? Why are you at the forefront of this sort of reimagining how travel can play a role in distributed work culture?
Yeah, I think it probably stemmed from a combination of what I've been looking at beforehand and then kind of being struck with a bit of a personal pain point along the way, but realizing that I wasn't the only person that had that. So friends had it. And then ultimately my co-founder, Jason, did as well too. So what I had been doing prior to Roamr was essentially looking at how Uber and Airbnb built trust and adoption. The summary that I tend to give there, that if anyone has heard it at this point will annoy them for me re-explaining it. But ultimately, my parents gave me two lessons in life. Don't get in the car with a stranger and don't answer the door to a stranger. You saw Uber and Airbnb just completely blow those like high standing societal barriers down. And I was just really gripped by that, understanding what was the change in, consumer social psychology stuff that went on there. But while I was researching that as part of the PhD research, all these changes in the way we work started happening, obviously kind of turbocharged by COVID, but there was definitely underlying trends there beforehand. And it felt to me personally and selfishly like an option for us to potentially do both. So myself and my girlfriend were going to go to Marseille at the time. We were going to go out and do a sort of work from anywhere type of trip, do a month down there. I was in academia, so I had corrections on my laptop, and in theory I could have gone anywhere and done them. And then I went on to book on one of the other platforms that we'd use for those kind of trips, and it was extortionate pretty much and couldn't afford it, and that kind of killed the dream. So that probably got the personal juices going. I met Jason along the way. He could completely resonate with the problem. We spent a bit of time then stress testing what we were thinking was a changing tide in the way we work and the way we manage travel by having customer type conversations just to discover whether they had pain points, and they had pretty significant ones. So that kind of led us to the path that we're on.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's actually really key to look at those expectations of what we're first taught. I think that's a really funny way to sort of get into it. And yeah, Airbnb and Uber is something that we'd never really imagined, and it's completely shaped the way that the world is now. So yeah, thank you so much for that. I think it's really interesting, and it sort of sets the level for where we're going to explore. And then obviously you find out all those different challenges and the remote culture dilemma. But sort of in your experience then, what's the biggest misconception about using travel to build culture in these distributed teams?
Interesting one. Yeah, I think LinkedIn can kind of blur our understanding of reality sometimes. You tend to see all these big, massive, expensive team offsites as like the highlights of people's experience. And don't get me wrong, they're amazing and a lot of fun and everybody enjoys them. But what we're starting to see now is companies are much more tactical around what that budget is meant to go and do and meant to achieve, right? We're in a period now where cost reduction is pretty much priority number one across the board, not just in the office of the CFO now. And, everyone has that mandate to try to be lean. But at the same time, if we pull back on travel, that means pulling back on productivity and people rowing together and collaborating and all kind of singing off the same hymn sheet. It means pulling back on customer visits and therefore close revenue. So it's a real difficult thing to jeopardize pretty much for the business. So what we've started to see now is it's not all about culture only being built at those big team offsites. It's about these incremental meetups, grassroots meetups, internal meetings. That's become the largest slice of the corporate travel pie now. So more money is being spent on internal meetings and office visits than it is on customer visits. So that's now 33% of corporate travel entirely in terms of the spend. Customer visits is at 27%. It was 28% before COVID. So the largest slice of the pie is probably the misconception, which is kind of interesting, right? Everyone thinks it's the big office meetup or annual offsites. Actually, the biggest spend item is just getting team members together, kind of tiger team stuff.
Yeah, exactly. I think the thing with the offsite is everyone loves a holiday. And I think that's the sort of positive attachments to a holiday and going away is what gets attached to that offsite thing. But I think people can leave feeling, oh, yeah, it's nice you met someone, but also like, what difference did that actually make? And I think it's drawing that back to, is it that is the biggest misconception of it. It's like you need to utilize this in a way to build culture rather than because they're expensive. The places you can hold them in, the Airbnbs, the villas, the holiday hotels, and if there's sort of nothing that creates a successful business ideas from it or culture, then I think you need to sort of go back to the drawing board, which is exactly that misconception and where the difference is there, what an offsite is. And what you can use that for. So, how do you think companies then could go from shifting their mindset from travel as a perk to travel as a culture building tool?
I think what's good to see from our perspective is that they're kind of already doing that, and the evidence is in that sort of data and that spend. But there's a couple of nuggets of how we've started to see people think differently about it. One of them that makes a lot of sense. That's what you're saying there. It's one of my favorite talking points is Dr. Raj Chowdhury with Zapier did a really good study on their offsite to try and understand, is the money that we're spending on this worthwhile? So ultimately they looked at communication patterns on Slack before the event and then tried to see, did we see an uplift? Did we see new connections? People, cross department, cross function, connecting and keeping connecting after the event. And they kind of found these outlier pockets of people that kind of made no sense based on what they thought, but they dug a little deeper and found out that it was based on those people sharing taxi rides out to the event. So this sort of engineered serendipity is one way that I think companies are now being a bit more intentional with those team meetups. So I think the big piece is, travel can be seen as a perk when it's that big company offsite and it's like, great, I get to join a company where there's like a kind of holiday mode, but that's only going to be 1 week in the whole year. There needs to be supplemental time where these team members get together. The more distributed we become as just an industry or as companies become, the more difficult that problem will be, right? We're further and further apart, which is great for talent hiring and finding people in different and diverse ideas. But now when we are doing that, how do we get team members together in person for that time? There needs to be a little bit more intentionality behind it. So I think using incentives and rewards are ways that companies have started to think about it a little bit differently as well too, to try to get the right behaviors going.
Yeah, and that's that exact shift, isn't it? Because it's those like rewards, recognition while you're there is going to help build the culture rather than utilizing it as just a travel. And as you say, the whole reason of wanting to create a global company is distributed teams. So there's going to be more people across the world in more spread out countries. So finding a spot that is A, cost effective for people to get to, and B, that anyone can get to is going to be a struggle. And it's trying to find that balance and making it that it's utilizing it as a culture building tool rather than just perks. I think that's really good points. And I love the taxi thing because I think that's such an amazing thing because I think taxi sharing is one of those moments where you jump in the car and maybe you've never met them before, or you're just sharing and you're all going to the same journey for the same reason, and it's like a lift but a longer amount of time. So you've all got to think of a topic to speak about and everyone tries to open up a little bit. And I really enjoy that because it gives people an option to speak about something that's their interest in or a hobby rather than something that maybe the speech was talking about in the offsite, for example. So yeah, I really do like that. And I'd love
There's something
to
about the mobility there too, right? When you free up a little bit and you're on the move and you're traveling together,
yeah.
there's definitely a connection that comes along with that for sure.
Usually there's a buzz from the previous place going to the next place as well. So it's usually quite a high energy. I think that's a really nice thing to encompass in a taxi of four people that maybe have never met each other before. I think that's really nice. And it goes back to the Uber thing that you said about people getting in taxis and you never thought that was going to happen. So it relates quite nicely there. But I'd love to hear some of these other stories if you've got anything else. I know we said meetups, trips that blend in work with local community experiences are really good ways to blend that experience and get people together. Do you have any sort of creative examples or team gatherings you've actually seen that have worked really well to create a greater connection?
Yeah, I think what we've started to see is there's actually even specific jobs, like job titles being created in this space. Like it's trying to figure out, does this land on the workplace experience team? Is there sort of there's a lot of folks that are redesigning office space to be intentionally collaborative and trying to find ways to bring team members together. So I like at Roamr, what we do is we help companies save money on their corporate travel accommodation by having their employees stay with friends, colleagues, family members when they're traveling. So we take the money that would have been spent on the hotel and we split it up essentially three ways. The company saves 30%, the traveling employee gets 30%, and their host, who could be a friend or a colleague living in that city, they also get 30%. So we've seen companies use that around these kind of gatherings, right? So, example, there's an Irish company that we work with called Protex. They're doing a great job. They're growing crazy, crazy numbers, but they do things like a summer party where they'll bring their folks into Dublin, which is HQ, and they have office space there with the sort of hybrid model and remote employees. But when they're traveling, some of them could host one another. The founders, get involved in this. So Kieran, who's what the CTO, he would have hosted one of his colleagues, and it's just a different experience, right? There, a little bit more informal, right? You're chatting in the evenings, you're sharing that spin back home, and it kind of takes the whole need for this sort of straight back and office and all official sort of interaction. Everybody gets to know each other in a slightly different, more informal way. We also saw another company who they were doing a team offsite, but they chose to use we have a map on Roamr where you can see where your colleagues are. You can create events and people can opt in to attend an event. But what we have on the map is everybody has a bio. What are your interests and hobbies? What do you like to do outside of work? And you can use that if you create an event and you can see there's going to be 10 people here and 6 of them like cycling. We've seen, rather than it become, hey, we're going to do a walk on the beach in the morning, it's like, well, why don't we rent a couple of bikes? Everybody shares over or connects over their shared hobbies and interests a little bit deeper than just kind of surface level stuff. So we've seen people sort of tweak and adapt some of the designs of the time they've spent together as well.
Yeah, I think that is exactly what reimagining these gatherings are, because firstly these informal conversations are exactly what sparks interests of finding out people's hobbies, finding out what people do on a weekend. And sometimes it's the coffee shops that are virtual, the one-to-ones. It's sometimes a little bit about the outside world, but it's usually just about work chat. And you're trying to find a balance, but you're not trying to go too off topic because you've only got 45 minutes with someone or something like that. So I think that's a really good way to do that. And yeah, finding out what interests people have from their bios and tailoring your offsite experience to be something that everyone's going to be interested in, or maybe a lot of people are. And I think that's a really niche, nice way to tailor and bring more people and bring a stronger connection, and maybe something that a lot of people don't think about. It's definitely an interesting point, and I think it's something that people should start thinking a little bit more about people's interests, what their home life is, and how they can encompass that to make them feel a bit more comfortable at these events. Because people might be coming from afar, maybe they work remotely all the time, so doing something like this might be a little bit out of their comfort zone. So if there's something that can help them to come on a cycling event, or someone's interested in dogs and you can stay with them, if there's just something there that can help, I think that's also a really nice touch.
Yeah, I think we have that level of intentionality around big company team meetups where, the whole detail is planned, but, maybe we are lacking in terms of seeing how intentional are we with our more general travel, right? Which is actually a lot more of our spend. And we're starting to see people spending more on that so that they can build relationships specifically so that we can do our best work. But the same level of intentionality to the design of those things probably isn't there as it is in these big one-off annual spends, which is ironic because for most companies, more is being spent on just typical travel as people are moving and trying to meet customers, meet colleagues, and everything else.
Exactly, yeah. So then, as we're sort of discussing about this like design aspect of meeting up travel perks, do you think there are any essential elements when designing a travel experience that does foster that connection?
Yeah, well, I suppose we're a little bit biased here because we've tried to build in that space. But I think what you need to try and understand would be how is it changing now versus what it was 3, 4, 5 years ago. What we're starting to see now is travel is back kind of beyond pre-COVID levels, which is contradictory to what most people think because we can now communicate with virtual calls more frequently than we had done in the past. But we're also seeing more people and more team members are traveling. So the number of travelers is up as well as just the spend being up. So now you have all of these behaviors that you maybe have to guide. There wasn't the same level of frequency within um, there wasn't the same level of rigor on the process than there might have been before, and there needs to be now because of the cost reduction piece. So we've started to see companies implement sort of do behavior analysis on the travel patterns and then try to implement incentives and rewards on the back end of that. So that might be something like we talk a lot about travel bloat at Roamr. This is kind of this unhidden expanding an inefficiency within your travel spend. So it could be something as simple as the lead times of your bookings are significantly lower than the average, right? So we see that in personal consumer spend, the lead time, the average trip booking time is 17 weeks before you go. When you do that in a corporate market, it's somewhere between 13 and 18 days. Now, there's a whole bunch of reasons for that. Like some of them could be just a customer visit cropped up, let's go get it. But the majority is a little bit more planned out than that. We know we're going to conferences months in advance, but we don't get our act together. That's probably because the company is the one spending it. So there's this not the same level of need for me to keep my pocket protected. So we've seen companies do decent things in terms of identifying the behaviors and then try to add incentive models on top. Sometimes that's setting budgets, and if you book beneath that budget, you get a little kickback at the savings. So there's other platforms out there that will help you do that. How we've taken that on is if you end up tapping into your own personal network, that drives real high savings for the company. So 30% of whatever that hotel would have been, and then try and share the split by opting into that decision. I've seen really interesting companies do it with incentivizing more sustainable travel. So they'll try and have ways where they'll help people get a train instead of a plane is the obvious example. But again, for us, it's a similar thing, right? With Roamr, if you're staying in a space that already exists, you're tapping into dormant space rather than opening a whole new hotel room and all of the overheads and the emissions that come along with that. So I think people are starting to see what are our patterns, what do they need to be, and how do we kind of put in place policies to try and guide that way.
Definitely, and you can see that change there. And I think that's really interesting that like a personal hotel holiday is 17 weeks, but corporate travel is 12 to 18, was it? So it's crazy because a lot of these events are planned months in advance by the marketing team, creating the event content, creating people that they're going to meet up with, panelists, their CEOs, co-founders speaking at all these events. So it's funny to see that then the booking side of it is the thing that's sort of pushed back because people want to go to these events, they want to network, they want to showcase their expert knowledge and skills and show all that. But then it's that I think it's just that booking is the element. They're like, oh God, no one's booked the hotel, so they do it. And I've seen things that sometimes events put on like a booking station, and you can book through like and get codes and stuff from there. But it becomes convoluted because no one knows where they're staying and stuff. So I think having these incentives in place to create more of a streamlined project managed sort of route to booking your stay is a lot better than having loads of different options. People can book anything and it all seems a little bit chaotic and not incohesive. So I love this going into sort of the sustainability thing because obviously at Roamr, the rooms, the places are already existing. So there's not much more that has to be done there. It sort of is already there for those people. And I think that's a really nice way to tap into sustainability as a business. Because I think sometimes like SaaS businesses, software businesses, they sometimes struggle with that element but then if they can plug into already existing travel and play trains instead of planes and things like that, they can do it as they go along, not try and overly um, work and try and do something that's maybe not sustainable for them as well. So I think that's some really good points there about the redesign and that experience. And then you've come up with some amazing stories, but I really do enjoy the statistics and things like that. Is there any sort of data points or insights that has surprised you about these travel experiences, and maybe that you've seen that has really made a difference there?
I think these would probably be internal data points for us. Like for us, when we came up with this idea, it was driven by customer conversations. It was driven by the fact that there was tailwinds, right? The tailwinds that we saw was the way that we work was completely changed, right? You guys essentially have created work from anywhere, right? That's now kind of ubiquitous. It's a normal thing. At the same time, the way that we manage travel in companies has changed. It used to be a sort of travel manager might be a center point, or that would fall under someone in the people team. But now you roll out systems where it's actually the end employees are the ones that tend to do the booking for themselves. There's a bunch of these platforms that are out there. So for us, when we saw the new idea that we were conceptualizing, which was saying, hey, when you're traveling for work, instead of staying in the hotel that would have been provided, tap into the network that's there, whether it's friends, family, colleagues, the open Roamr network. You get paid for doing it, your host gets paid, and everybody's winning. We didn't really expect to see the big uplift that we did. Obviously, we had belief in ourselves that we were building something valuable and we were excited about it. So the thing that really surprised us was probably the adoption that we saw in terms of just the global application of that adoption. So we have users in 100 countries within 2 years, but plenty time before 2 years in terms of how long we've been around. The fact that that many people all across the world bought into the idea showed us the validation that those tailwinds are now materializing in ambition to do something a little bit different, right? So if that makes a little bit of sense. The other side of the coin is like we've seen adoption in some of the customers that we roll out to up to about 30% in a couple of months, which for something that probably would be comparative to a perk or benefit, that's quite high, because you see a lot of these systems get rolled out into these companies and they just kind of sit idle and there's not the same activation and usage. Whereas people seem to be excited about the concept. For us, it's a choice. If you want to stay in the hotel, you can do that. That will be an option for you. Some people will always take that preference. But to see that so many people are looking at the thing that we were doing early was quite an exciting, surprising one, I suppose, frankly, for us at the outset.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think firstly, plugging into that work from anywhere concept, obviously we're a big advocate of that. And if you can have people that are local experts, that also plays into what we specialize in, having local entities on the ground, because they're the people that know the local food restaurants, the local sightseeing. If you've got a day to explore somewhere, I know I'd like to try the local cuisine, see a site if I can in my spare time, and yeah, just see what's local around me and just try and use the time. I know you've got a conference on, for example, but you might have a spare hour to be able to look around and see something that you've always wanted to see. So it's having those local people that can actually say, oh, I've got a few recommendations for you here, actually can make that little bit of difference as well. And that networking becomes a little bit more informal, as you said, and helps tailor that. So I think that's a really nice added element of that. And it definitely helps shape that the data point that you said. I really enjoyed that.
Yeah, I think what we've seen as well is the because of the fact that we can work from anywhere now, and that sort of ubiquitous access to being online means that people are now looking at the fact that they're on the move for work as an opportunity for a little bit of extra exploration, right? So we've seen that 60% of trips are now extended from business into leisure. I don't love that term. I kind of hate it, but the reality is people are tacking on an extra day. 1.5 days is the average increase in terms of the trips that are happening. So people are extending their time into these spaces. That can be great for a company. It can be great for employee engagement too, right? Everybody takes a little bit of extra time. You're really kind of manic after a couple of days being, in conference mode or whatever it might be. Tack on a day, co-working space, work in the place that you're staying, and get back to the normal world after that. But it just kind of gives an opportunity for companies to give a little more to their employees in a way that might actually be cost neutral or even save them money, right? If we're able to now fly at off-peak times, for example, because we're adding a day, we're not flying on the Friday, we're going to take away home on the Saturday, that might be a more cost-effective decision for the company, which is quite an interesting play there.
Yeah, definitely. I think, yeah, that's definitely something that maybe companies don't think about as much because as an employee, traveling to an event might be new and exciting, or it might be something that someone's doing every 2 weeks, so it becomes exhausting. It just depends on the job role, what they're going out for, whether it's conference, client meetings, etc. And I think, yeah, having that extra day and a half or week if you want to, maybe even, yeah, exploring the sites. If you want people to come and join you, might have friends staying there and you can meet up with them. I think that added extra makes the journey of where you're going a little bit nicer, and it makes you then enjoy every travel opportunity that you have, which is that taking that stress element away, making sure that you've got those 3 days to focus on work and then 2 days in a co-working space and enjoying the food. If you're in Italy, you've got pasta for tea, so you can just enjoy that. And I think that's a really nice sort of add-on to make that travel better, and also helps with the culture side of things. As you said, there might be a few different people there and you can co-work afterwards and speak about the event and what you learned, and it also adds a little bit of getting to know each other as well.
And we're not saying that employees should be allowed to close up their laptop for 2 days and go exploring, right? But what we mean is like, right, if you're going to be in that city anyway, it's going to be super expensive to fly home on one of the days, add on a day, and then in your evening you have that extra little bit of time to go do the things that you mightn't have got to do. If we're in this world of constantly been dialed in and been so committed to the day job, the way that we see the reaction to that sometimes is people just opt out of the workforce and try and cram that travel into a year or 2 years. So it's actually a really tough thing that companies grapple with in a particular cohort, probably within that Gen Z cohort, right? Of folks who are 26 maybe plus, they haven't had that chance to do a little bit of exploration. So it's a huge brain drain that can happen in companies. Whereas if I look at it through my own lens, when we kickstarted this, the goal was actually finally there's a way for us to do both. I've been watching all my friends head off to Australia and Bali and, have all of that all over their Instagrams and everything else, and getting jealous about it, about the fact that I've chosen a path here to really drive it on in my 20s. But it just felt like a light bulb moment of, hey, here's a way that I maybe don't have to sacrifice all of the life experiences and I can progress my career at the same time. So that was kind of the kickstart of my own personal kind of journey in here and view of it.
And I also think I briefly said before, like people could get quite stressed if it's an event that they've been planning for a while and they're at the forefront of that and they've got a lot to do for that day. Sometimes the meal afterwards or something like that is another energy, like heavy thing. So sometimes people don't want to be going for the meal after and stuff. And if they have a little bit of leeway either side, and they say, "Oh no, I just need to go back to my room tonight. I've been so heavy, but tomorrow I don't have a conference. Let's go for some dinner tomorrow." It sort of adds on that little bit of you can relax an evening, but then take another night to enjoy yourself once everything's over and you're happy that you've successfully done the event. So I think that's a great thing.
I think in those circumstances, that's when a lot of the actual relationship building gets done from a customer lens. But there is definitely a fatigue that can go along with it. It reminds me of an event that we were at in Lisbon. We all had 2 or 3 days of everybody's turned on hyper like focus, and then we went out for tacos with a group of like 15 or 16 people. But there was one particular company that we were trying to talk to because we really admired what they were doing with their talent brand and felt like it might be really nice alignment with Roamr. And Jason ended up sitting alongside the person that we were kind of trying to line up, right? And she had looked across the table and said, "What do Roamr do?" And Jason was exhausted from a few days, and he goes, "We do corporate travel. We're pretty cool." And the whole table erupted laughing because everyone could relate to the fact that it was just fatigue of saying the same thing over and over again. So those little moments everybody kind of lets the hair down a little bit more, and more happens,
Yeah,
I think, and more
your
relationships are
jaw
built.
feels like it's been hurting because you've been smiling all day and reciting the same thing, and you finally get to network that you pass the people that you want to the most, and it's like, ah, just get a glass of wine and let's just relax and speak about this in a normal way, which is actually a quite nice element as well, I think, is takes that fatigue and maybe a bit more of the pressure off of that.
But even like to bring it back around, like, because these are all like very clear strategic things that businesses should be doing. It's probably something that we're kind of saying, hey, it's great to be a little bit more informal, and everybody enjoy when they're on the move. The reality is we're here for work, right? We're trying to build relationships. We're trying to close deals at most of these conferences. What we've started to see now in companies that we speak to is, because everybody has access from a kind of cold outbound, right, perspective, everybody has access to be able to send thousands of outbound, automated emails, calls, whatever it might be, en masse. That's starting to become like a hygiene factor, meaning like table stakes, right? If everybody has access to outbounding to all of these companies, what are we going to be able to do that's different to them? So I think about it like the Nash equilibrium from economics, a beautiful mind, Russell Crowe movie, if you haven't seen it. But Nash equilibrium is essentially, if Pepsi and Coca-Cola, they're both spending millions on advertising. If one of them, or if both of them said, hey, if we just stopped doing this, their market share would stay where it is. But the reality is, if one of them stops, the other one goes. And that's when market share would switch over. So they're kind of forced to have to spend all this money. And now we start talking to leaders and CEOs who are trying to make strategic decisions about their outbound. And they're kind of saying, everybody's doing this. What are we going to do to separate us? And they're all opting in to more travel, more customer meetings, more people on the road. So that's happening. So they're focusing very clearly their spend on how do we build relationships in person, so that we see it manifest itself in sort of, side dinners where they get out to London. It happened very recently. I met someone on the kind of the shop floor at one of these conferences. I said, are you guys doing any other trips? Then he was going over to London in a couple of weeks' time for one of these big dinners that they organize, just kind of informal get together with their buyers, try to just be, a conduit of conversation pretty much. For us, that's great, right? That's great to see, because it means more travel and people are on the move more, but it means that the goal is to try to build relationships, and that happens within the team or it happens beyond that. So it was really cool to see that conversation that I had lead into that person using Roamr. So we have we Roamr for our company's Roamr for work when we sell to a company, but we also have a product called Roamr for friends, which means if your company isn't a customer on Roamr right now, but you're traveling to a city where you know somebody on a work trip, you can log on to Roamr/friends, create your account, and essentially invite them to a trip. You get paid and they get paid. So we saw that conversation lead to an actual trip happen within a couple of weeks, all because that person was traveling for work and probably didn't go and book the trip in time. So there was a little bit of an opportunity for us to get in when the prices were high, and the hotel that he would have got anyway was probably crappy for the budget that he had at that point in time. So people are rethinking that spend massively, and it's very much focused on relationship building.
Definitely, yeah. I think the email side of the network side is all sort of quick, easy, feels productive. And it is because it sort of can start that relationship. But I think sometimes building those relationships and those face to face networking and actually speaking to someone is huge. And it makes sense that even if, yeah, a video call, a podcast like this, building trust with each other faster. You can pick up on those non-verbal cues that may be missed in emails, especially if you're working as a distributed team. You may be speaking to somebody that speaks a little bit differently to you. So someone might come across a little bit rude or abrupt. But if you're speaking to someone face to face, whether that is on video or in person, I think it can create a more memorable connection than an email that's just passing by and you completely forgot who it got sent by, the company name, and what the point of the email was. So I think if you can pull that into the networking side and create that transition of making a lasting impression, I think can definitely benefit people that are going to these events.
Yeah, and it also says to the customer, like, I specifically care about you, right? We will do our level best to close your business. If you're getting out, going across the country to meet someone, maybe for a half an hour or an hour long meeting, that speaks volumes to how attentive you're going to be to their business, right? And if they're doing a sort of, right, we're looking at 3 or 4 different solutions. If you're the one who's shown a desire to get out there, get to know that person, and put the spend behind it, that's going to be the thing that differentiates you.
Definitely, yeah.
My lord, I see not how this pertaineth to the data analyst position.
If thou can extract a sword, thou can extract data. Thunder and badgers! From whence do ye hail, mighty peasant?
Vancouver!
Vancouver? Nay! We cannot employ internationally. The fees, the red tape! It must be put back. Be gone, Canadian!
Sometimes with this, the spend and the travel, the time, the budgets, there's obviously the challenges. So, have you seen any challenges that you've seen perhaps companies face when they are trying to change this sort of travel in a way that can benefit them as a company?
It's a really, really tough thing right now because the macro climate and the outlook that we have is a little bit more pessimistic than it might have been in previous years. So we're in this sort of balancing act of we want more people on the road, whether that's meeting customers or whether that's meeting team members. But at the same time, there's an alternative now, which is the video call. So you're kind of in this grappling of, right, making the decision on, is all of that money on the really expensive hotels going to be worth it? How do we figure out the decision making around it? Like hotel prices are growing 10% year on year. Q4 of last year, we kind of hit an all-time high in terms of the average hotel cost in the United States, in and around $533 per night. It's crazy. It's really, really expensive. So you're trying to grapple with, we have this budget for travel. How do we get as much out of it as possible? So when we speak to sales leaders and we present Roamr to them as a concept and say, hey, if you're doing a conference and you're planning on sending 3 people, if they use Roamr because they know people in that city, doesn't have to be a colleague, right? It can be a friend from college. It can be a family member. You've essentially saved 30% for every trip that gets booked on the platform, which means you've freed up the budget for another trip. So that's a huge unlock in some of the sales leaders' mind for us, because their goal is, here's my budget for travel. How do I get as many people out on the road to go and meet those customers? So now they could maybe send the sales engineer with the 3 salespeople out to that event. So that's been one kind of huge piece, I think, that we've started to see the appetite within the market. It's not just the cost reduction. That lands really well with the CFOs. It's like, hey, we're trying to be lean. We have such a clear ROI to the product because it just computes straight to the bottom line, right? Every trip booked through the platform is 30% cheaper than whatever their alternative was. So we set it up based on how they spend money on hotels currently. Maybe they have nightly rates. Maybe they have partner hotels in certain cities. Maybe it's market prices. So they can see that go straight to the bottom line. The CFOs get to give it back almost as a goodwill gesture to the team member, being like, hey, we know this is a cost reduction initiative, but we're creating a financial opportunity for you at the same time. So when we talk to sales orgs, it's a little different. It's like, right, I have this budget. How do I get as much and as much and as much out of it? So I think that's one way of us trying to bridge the gap between, we know the world is really expensive around us and getting worse and worse and worse, but we know that we want people on the move. We know that we want relationships being built internally and externally. How do we balance that act? And we're kind of trying to find something in that space that it's a win for both sides.
Exactly. I think, as you said there, it's like you are going to be spending, but you should be maybe not spending less, but just spending smarter. You can have a £200 hotel room with a tiny room, no breakfast, a rubbish pillow, and you can hear the next door person having an argument. So, but you can have a room which has a nice room. You've got a kitchen as well. A lot of the time, people sometimes don't want to be on the move and eating. They want to just be able to cook themselves something for breakfast or make themselves a coffee when they can. And I think having the trick is knowing what you value as a person or a business. And do you want a posh hotel with a pool that you're probably never going to use, or do you want something that's more valuable to what you're looking for? And I think that's definitely the key there, because the challenge is, yeah, the budget probably isn't a challenge, because the reason that they want to be traveling and they've got this budget is because they're doing the event. So it's there. It's just finding out what is really what you want to get out of it, really.
Yeah. It's kind of trying to figure out how do we get more from less, pretty much is the problem that companies have at the moment. For us, it's really interesting that when we're very fortunate in terms of the timing, right? We now live in this post Airbnb, post Uber world. Everybody's totally comfortable with the sharing economy. We know what it is. If we tried to launch Roamr in 2008, we'd have had a much harder time, right? Because back then people are going, what do you mean I'll stay with a stranger, or I'll open my, or you mean I'm going to tell a stranger exactly where I am and they're going to come in a car to where I am right now? That's insane, right? We now live in a totally different world, right? That's the default in terms of consumer markets, is the sharing economy. What we're seeing as a really interesting insight in the conversations we have with customers is when the Airbnb team were trying to sell Airbnb into the corporates, it was a really difficult task, and became more difficult as prices became parity, right? Because originally they had this sort of, hey, this is cheaper than the hotels that are out there, but over time that just eroded, and market effects meant that pretty much it's the same price. So you've articulated the decision that travelers make nowadays. They decide, am I getting a hotel or a type of Airbnb? If I want to have a gym on site or that pool or whatever it might be, or a bar or a restaurant, I'll go with the hotel. If I like a bit more space, if I want to cook my meal, I'll go with the Airbnb. That always comes down to operating in their own self-interest, right? So they have a budget, go make a decision between the two of those. There's no real reason for the company to get behind saying, hey guys, when you travel, by default, we want you to try and stay at an Airbnb, because there was no real meaningful reason for the companies to push that mandate. Whereas what we're seeing with Roamr is, because we can guarantee them a savings of 30% every time, now there's a reason for companies to want to get behind it. And that's beyond like the cultural benefit of that burritos and dog walks and all those other things that people end up doing in their spare time. But there's an incentive there now for the end employee, because they're still operating within their own self-interest. And that self-interest in Roamr scenario is, hey, you potentially get $100 and you create that financial opportunity for your friend or your colleague as well. So the fact that both traveler and host are getting paid, and companies say that it feels now like we've found a model in this new world of work, a new world of managing travel, where actually everybody wins. It's not mandated, but the incentives on the company side to roll it out and on the employee side are high enough that that's what they're wanting to do. That feels like a really easy win. And it means there's now a reason to get behind this as a company and say, this is something that we want to roll into the workforce, because it has impact both sides of the table pretty much.
Yeah, I think that sharing economy is exactly where we're at the moment. I'm a big advocate for it. If we go away, we get Airbnb or house. If you get a Uber that's shared rather than that, and co-working spaces as well. We don't, full offices are now sort of deteriorated, and co-working spaces are the new place where people want to be. So especially for distributed workforces, digital nomads, remote workers, these like sort of core things are what they're looking for when they're going away. And like, no, we don't have to own everything. It's just nice to access it and have a little bit of finger in each pie, so you can try everything. And I think that's the key there, which sort of looks at the challenges and sees that the solution is sharing and getting people involved with it, and making people be able to also utilize everything rather than only having sort of one thing. I think that's a really nice thing there. And I think that sort of probably does lead me on to the next question. But do you have sort of, what are these practical solutions that you've seen, obviously Roamr, but that can address these challenges? And I think we've spoke about it. It's just like that sharing economy.
Well, I won't go hard pitching. Obviously, people hopefully will know what we do. But I think if I had some practical advice, what we've seen the companies that are doing a really good job here do is have a bit of a deeper understanding of how do people manage travel within our company, right? So what are the behaviors that are happening here? Because we've conceptualized the kind of umbrella term for all of these inefficiencies is travel bloat. So we've kind of a blog series that we're putting out detailing different ones of them. It's so interesting to look under the hood of travel. It's not just a number of how much do we spend on travel. There's different things around, right? Obviously, there's the lead time example that I gave you, where it's totally different in corporate markets versus personal markets. If we can move the needle on that even a tiny bit, if we can go from 13 days to 16 days, because the prices move so much in that period of urgency, right before booking, that could be a really, really cost-effective new habit that you've rolled into your organization, right? And then if it becomes 16, the next year it becomes 17, and you kind of build on top of those habits. We've seen some companies do a really good job where they bring their manager into the decisions around travel. So, there's a company that we're chatting with at the moment, and they use one of the other corporate travel platforms out there. They look through their data at the user level. So how many times has Stephen traveled? How many times has Leah traveled? They sit with their head of partnerships, head of sales, and they say, hey, Leah's making a ton of sales, Stephen's making no sales. Why might that be? Seems like Leah's spending a lot of money on travel and client meetings, but that's converting. So maybe that's where the world is at right now. That's what people are caring about in our buyer channel. Oh, we can see that Stephen's not spending money on that. Maybe that's an insight that we can implement. Beyond that, like, there's layers of approvals and controls that companies are kind of trying to add into to have those to guide those behaviors. Sometimes that can be actually a negative rather than a positive, because the approval can take a day or two before the manager thumbs it up. And actually what some of the other platforms do is they bake in expectation of prices moving. So they bake in a buffer at the point of the employee making the request. So what I mean by that is, let's say today I'm making a request to you, my manager. I want to go to this New York conference and it's going to cost me this on hotels and this on flights. Send it off to you for approval. You're crazy busy. You're doing a podcast. You're taking a day off here and there. So it takes 48 hours. So what they do is they sometimes buffer in, it could be 20% of a price lift. You approve at the higher price. And then I, operating in my own self-interest, I'm going to spend all of that budget that's just been given to me. I'm going to get the nicest hotel I can. I'm going to get the best flight at the right time for me. All of those little inefficiencies massively stack up and stack up and up and up and up. If you can bring the workforce into insight and the managers into that, maybe it's a way for us to start saying, hey, here are our behaviors. Here are our desired behaviors. If you meet those desired behaviors, here's how we'll pay you back. And it could be something like a kitty that goes in at the end of the year for those corporate offsite. It can be the way that we've obviously taken the approach is, hey, if you opt into the right decision, because the company saves 30%, you also get a kickback as well too, and you earn 30%. So it's identifying the behaviors is probably the starting point for that.
Yeah, I think that's a really nice way to look at it, analysing the behaviours of why maybe something is working and something isn't. And if that is spending more money on travel to get people together, to network, to get people back and following up on those connections and building that and creating the sale, it's definitely worth investing in. And I think sometimes people don't want to invest because they're scared to put a lot of money into an event, making a bigger stand, doing a panel talk, sponsoring. I think sometimes those things are the scary step into it, because companies know it's going to cost a lot of money, which is fair enough because budgets can be scary, but the stats and the data is clearly there that shows that events, networking, face-to-face interactions is providing so much more than the email and that's going missing in people's inboxes and things. And I think that is a really key thing to putting people forward and taking that step into travel and utilising corporate travel companies like yourself to tailor it and make it maybe a little bit more budget effective, making employees get 30%, the company, the person providing it, having that extra add-on is definitely a nicer way for the company to look at it if they're a bit scared to step into that travel. And it's a great practical advice.
Yeah, and just I want to kind of go a layer deeper on it, because I don't think too many companies would have pushback on the statement that if you travel more to meet clients, you'll close more deals. Like, there's very few companies that will kind of say you're wrong in that. But nearly what I mean is, like, that's now what you're going to have to do because your competitors are doing it. So how do you do that in a way where you get more out of the budget you're going to spend on that? So can you look at what are our behaviors around those trips that we're doing? Is our problem that we're not booking very efficiently? Is our problem that maybe we're sending the wrong reps and there should be different people? And even if it means bringing someone a little further afield who spend more money on flights, are they going to close better? So it's kind of going under the hood of, like, we know the reason that this doesn't maybe get the same level of inspection as it should is because travel to meet customers is such an ROI event. It's so obvious that, hey, people kind of pass it off as like, yeah, you can go and do that trip because we know you're going to make a sale and you're going to go close deals. And if you do X amount of trips, that's X amount of sales. But companies now, given where we're at in terms of a need to be cost efficient, there's probably more that they could be doing by looking under the behaviors of when we are doing those customer facing visits. Is there any way for us to squeeze a little bit more efficiency out of what we're doing there?
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. Making each journey travel experience be efficient for the business to create business success. That's the key element there. And as you said, the markets were crowded. They're even more crowded now. So whatever we can do to get the best out of it, with the budget that you're spending, with the connections that you're making to cut through that noise, I think that's exactly what everyone wants to get out of it. Everyone wants to get the highest ROI, the biggest connections, the biggest impressions there. So I think that's definitely what people need to be doing and looking forward for, and utilizing these events, yes, to network, but just getting that extra little bit out of it is definitely what people need to be doing. And as we've sort of discussed the different places, different people networking across the globe, obviously leaders, and you said managers getting involved, looking at the behaviours, but leaders probably need to ensure that these gatherings, travel expenses, experiences are inclusive and accessible. So how do you think they can ensure this and make sure that, yeah, different employees in different regions, perhaps with different needs, are getting looked at for this?
Yeah, it's tough because there's such a benefit to being able to have such a distributed team, right? I don't need to sing the praises of that. Like, you guys have built it, like that's what you're creating for folks. There's such a diverse opinion that you can bring in and understanding. There's also sort of geo arbitrage that can go on in terms of cost management as well too. But the further away we are, the more expensive and the more difficult it is to bring team members together. The challenge is, if you've got the distributed team members, by default, they're probably operating a little bit siloed, and the goal would be, we'll have our team meetups when we can. But, if you're too far afield with how those hiring decisions have happened, now you're going to get into this sort of isolation and, pockets of folks who don't feel attached to the mission and who therefore don't know their colleagues well enough, so that if they are needing to do an extra hour or two because there's a stack of work on their desk and I send off an email to someone that I haven't yet met, it's a lot easier to ignore it, instead of if we meet up every quarter and I know that I'm going to be looking you in the eye going, hey, I'm not helping you out when you ask for my help, right? That's the repercussion of not doing it. Yeah. But also the less sort of, mean version of that is, hey, if people meet together regularly in person, feel connected to the mission, feel connected to one another, when those emails come in, I will know, hey, I know that Fred's got a new kid on the way, for example. So I'll go the extra mile, because I have an understanding of this person's life. So it's tough because we have the distribution. We want to bring those team members in together, and there's no real conclusive answer other than, if you're doing these events, you've got to try and find ways to bring everybody in the team member there. A lot of workplace experience leaders are now trying to do more with the space that they have to make them a little bit more encompassing for that. It's like finding the engineered serendipity, finding those taxi rides, right? The taxi ride is just a metaphor for how do we find ways for people to connect across culture, across gender, race, religion. Because another takeout from that study that Dr. Chowdhury did was that they found that when people do these team meetups, they tend to just be drawn to folks who are demographically similar to them. That's not the most inclusive thing. Like, it can be quite an excluding thing if there's a pocket of folks who don't kind of conform to the typical race, gender, religion, whatever it is of the core of the company. And, we have to be a little bit more conscious to try and find these pockets of time to get team members collaborating across the org.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. And definitely, if people are drawing themselves to people who are, as you said, the same culturally, then that might actually also bring them closer and bring them a reason to come to it again, if they were finding that maybe they weren't feeling inclusive because they weren't involved, but then they arrive and there's the people that they share common interests in religion, culture with. That can also be a great way to bring that in. And of course, people are spread across time zones. There could be language barriers, there could be different responsibilities, neurodiversity. And I think making sure there's a space so everyone feels comfortable and can find these moments of a taxi ride to be able to click with someone in a little different way. I think that's actually a really nice way, and I like this method of the taxi ride. I think it's really like pulling throughout. So
yeah, but it would defeat the whole point of having an intention to diversify your workforce if you're not finding time for them to collaborate across function, across org. So it's kind of, if you're not doing that, then maybe you're on the side of, hey, we're doing this diversity and hiring people in different pockets, maybe purely for the cost arbitrage. And if that's where the company's at, fine. But nobody would debate that diversity of ideas make better decisions. Maybe it slows them down a little bit, and that's fine too. But for the most part, folks tend to say, we want different opinions here. How are we going to bring them together and foster that?
Exactly. And I think that comes into sort of finally summarizing exactly what we've been speaking about, is that these moments of connection matter so much in today's hybrid and remote work environments. But yeah, why do you think this is going to help build the culture for the future of work?
I think it's because it computes to the bottom line, which is ultimately what folks are going to need to see to make these decisions. Otherwise, it could feel like nice to haves, and is the reason for us to do this. But when we see companies that are doing this well, being the hyper growth companies, that's when you should start perking up and listen, right? It's also a talent attraction thing, right? So I think about the lemons theory quite a lot, which is another economicsy nerdy thing to be thrown in here. But the lemons theory is typically used in used car markets where I don't know anything about a car. I'm not a mechanic. So if I'm going into the buyer market, there's a peach and a lemon. A peach is a great car. A lemon is a crappy car. If a lemon is 5,000 and a peach is 10,000, my brain midpoints, and most people will say, hey, I'm going to pay about 7,500 for this car because I can't compute the risk of one over the other. When that happens, all the owners of the really good cars leave the market, and you end up having the market flooded with lemons, right? If you think about that in your organization, now, it's not cars, right? But your biggest asset is the human capital that you have. If you are not doing this well and other companies are doing a better job at it, you're going to have this flight of talent leave your org. They're going to go to where they see this being done well, where they're seeing it managed well. We very much see the impressions on LinkedIn outperform from companies that have their employees sharing what it's like to work in a positive environment like that, about 8x versus companies that aren't. So the fact that this computes to the ROI is why it's going to work, but it's clear why it does,
Definitely. And I think that does draw back to the connection and the culture element, is that the real reason is that you're wanting to keep your employees at your business. You want a high retention rate. You don't want people dropping out because they're feeling isolated in remote teams. They're not feeling like they are connected. And I think that is exactly why building a high thorough connection is the best way to, and it builds a strategy for higher productivity, better workspace. And you can clearly see that when people are enjoying their work, that the work that they produce are better. And at the end goal, I think I've said it a few times, but yeah, business success, because you can see that the people are wanting to work there because they've got better culture. These connections actually matter, and the people are wanting to stay for a reason.
Yeah, we've seen that in the numbers as well. So I look to Flex Index quite a lot. I think they have a great kind of broad reaching data set, and they share really good insights quarterly. But they showed essentially companies that have any autonomy on location flexibility are outperforming companies that don't. And that's not even going into the weeds of we're fully remote, we have anchor days. It's not even breaking that down. But companies that have any insight or autonomy rather over their location for their employees are outperforming by about 5% in terms of the revenue. So that goes to prove the numbers of kind of what the anecdotes are kind of saying.
Yeah, definitely. So then I'd love to do a little roundup and get some, maybe like a practical piece of advice or step that you could share that would help people leaders take when they want to sort of rethink travel for their organization. People leaders, co-founders, managers, employees on an individual basis. Yeah, I think that would be really nice to just share, and we can do a little wrap up of a little quick fire as well.
Yeah, we'll use Roamr as too obvious a sentence to throw in as the answer there. But I think it kind of goes back to trying to figure out what are the desires that you need out of it, and then putting in place incentives for that. It doesn't always have to be a version of like cold hard cash is what you get for doing the behavior that we want. And it can be something as simple as bringing transparency to what the goals are out of the travel policy, bringing the managerial team into that so that we understand here's what we're trying to achieve. You have to have a baseline of where you're at. So that means properly understanding your travel data. It's not that difficult to do, right? You can extract often, most companies will have one of their corporate travel platforms in place. They'll be able to extract and export, look for patterns in that data. if you want, we're more than happy to do that for free and just jump on a conversation if folks are trying to understand baseline and those behaviors. We kind of do free travel pattern audits. The goal is not to turn around and be like, now you have to buy Roamr. On the end of it, it's have an understanding of what you're trying to achieve, where's baseline, and then try and put incentives and rewards in place for the appropriate behaviors. Nothing like a bit of competition as well, right? Get all of the different departments going, and it could be around a sustainability goal. It could be around, getting more ROI out of whatever you're spending, but have a little bit of competition, share the insights across those company departments, and people will start to buy in. You'll see it.
Definitely, I think identifying those challenges and maybe where you're feeling the downfall is the way that you can plug this in to rethinking travel and making it, if you're not having enough sales, plug in to do more of this. If you need it for these different elements of sustainability, for example, making sure that you're utilizing those challenges and pushing that into that. I think that's really great sort of practical advice there. And then a little quick fire to finish. Where do you see the future of travel and distributed work heading?
I think my answer to this probably built the foundation of our partnership with you guys here, where the world for a while was thinking about work from anywhere being the big future. Like, we're working towards this in 10 years time. You guys have kind of made that happen now, right? And, it's ubiquitously accepted. So what I believe the next chapter here is, it's how do we go from work from anywhere to work from everywhere, right? So work from anywhere in my eyes is somebody can be legally employed in any country in the world. We can build a team from any part of the globe and we can kind of work together pretty effectively. So that's work from anywhere in my eyes. Work from everywhere is how do we get that mobility element into those teams so that we're doing better work from anywhere. And I think the bridge between the two right now, the reason that people aren't walking across that bridge is just the sheer cost of it. It's super expensive. So if we can implement those strategies and be a little bit more efficient and thoughtful with what we're doing with our spend, I think we'll get across that bridge. But that's where I would see the next chapter.
I really like that. Just connecting that work from anywhere with work from everywhere is exactly what we want for the future of work. And I guess that sort of is what excites you. But if there's anything that you could specifically plug in about what excites you most about how this could reshape company culture.
I think we're starting to see the appetite within the folks who are doing it in companies that are there. What we've started to see is employees who use Roamr without us really kind of asking them or putting it upon them are sharing it on their own social media as a totally organic thing. So 80% of the folks who've done a trip have put out something to say, my company is super cool because we do these things. That content outperforms company-based content 8x, as I kind of alluded to earlier on. That's exciting for us because it means that we're seeing all of the value propositions happen in the places that we wanted it to happen. We're seeing the cultural element of people work together better. We're seeing the cost efficiency, but now there's also a new layer of value propositions that we're seeing around talent attraction by being a company. And it means something to do this. It's like a B Corp company. It means something to come and join a company like that. So for us, hopefully my excitement will continue insofar as a company that sort of puts their mast in the ground and says, we're a company that uses Roamr, means something about the organization's mindset generally. And we're starting to see the insights of that, which that kind of excites me personally. Has probably more of a selfish one rather than a whole global excitement.
Well, this is what this podcast's all about. So I think finally, as one selfish personal takeaway that you've learned from working with teams that are designing these experiences.
That's a hard one to leave on because we've started to see people use it very differently. Like we gave examples of summer parties and team meetups and having more people get out to the different events. So I think the broad sweeping answer would be the fact that people are taking it and using it in many different ways means that there's a little bit of application across the board. So we need to do a little bit more understanding of where those different channels are to make sure that we're helping companies and refine and build a product. But I think we're at the point now where we've got US public companies on the platform who are using it, which really shows that it's not just a phenomenon for early stage exciting startups who have a sort of just a general like early adopter mindset. This is something now that if you're probably not doing it or not thinking about it, you're already starting to become a laggard. So
yeah, exactly. It's thinking now about these things rather than waiting and becoming behind. And as you said, Pepsi Cola. One's always going to go above the other. If you don't act now, then you're going to start falling behind the others. Thank you so much for this hour of your time. It's been so interesting delving into these different aspects of comparing hotels with different stays, networking, the sharing economy, which is something that is definitely at the upfront of everyone's mind at the moment. And you've really shared a great amount of data analysis and theories about taxis throughout the podcast, which has really made me understand this from sort of those grounding challenges to overcoming them, and how as an individual business you can tailor your plan to utilize travel to create a better culture for your distributed teams. So thank you so much for your time and sharing all of your ideas and thoughts, and hopefully that sparked a lot of people's interest in rethinking travel.
Yeah, well, if it has, get in touch. Like, we love being part of those conversations. Like we're kind of answering at the end there. We don't really know. It's changing so fast. We don't know where we're going to be. So it's the conversation that teases out both sides of the coin there, in terms of us figuring out where we should live and what we should be building differently. So if it has sparked a tiny nugget of idea, positive or negative, and that's fine too, would love for folks to reach out and get in touch and share their thoughts.
And I think that fits into exactly why we call this podcast The Freedom of Work, because it's exactly what we're speaking about today. So thank you so much. Until next time, listeners, stay tuned and subscribe to our channel. Thank you so much for joining me, Stephen, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.